Rochelle is actually going to be teaching for me in 2 weeks. And that reminds me to do a quick technology thing with you. Next week, yeah. I'm excited. We're going to be out of town, away from technology completely for a whole week. I'm so excited. So, because it's always hard for me to not work. I'm always checking emails, even when I'm on vacation. So this will be good because I cannot do that. Somehow now that I have a job and I'm not just, well, not just, but I probably was always a workaholic, but it was with my family, so it didn't demonstrate itself. But now that I have a job, it does demonstrate itself a little bit. So I have some workaholic tendencies that I didn't know I had. So, all right, what a difference a week makes on at least my energy level this week is much higher, so watch out. I'm super excited about this lesson, and one of the things I'm a little, we are running behind. So if you remember, we were a whole chapter behind last week, and I'll try to catch us up this week, but I wasn't successful last night because I got super excited about a couple things. And so I do want to share them with you. And I also think that it's going to really help us in the future. Looking at some of this, it's going to lay a foundation for us to really even understand better some of the future. So if you remember, sometime after spring break, somewhere at the end of March or so, we will be done with Exodus, hard to believe, and we'll be flipping to Psalms, which is going to be a completely different feel. We won't get it all done, but we'll get, it's Psalms 1, but that doesn't mean the first chapter, it just means the first book of Psalms. And but we'll get a good portion of the Psalms done before summer. And so we'll be re-upping everything. So that means you'll be buying a new book and all of that coming at the end of March. But it is a good time to invite a friend as well. So just be thinking about that, because Psalms should be really meaningful and not as heavy in homework. And but Exodus has completely exceeded my expectations. And to be honest with you, y'all know I have this goal of somehow finishing the whole Bible before I die. And so Exodus was next. I'd never done it before. And so it just has far exceeded my expectation. So let me pray for us and we'll get started. God, we are so thankful to be together in this room, God, with women who love Jesus and love your word. And we just thank you for each person that's in here. God, we pray your blessings on them. And God, we know that there are many who are connected to our class, who've been in our class before, God, who are dealing with sickness and serious diagnosis, and God, just lots of things that happen in our lives. And God, this lesson is so pertinent to all of those things. And God, I pray you would teach us and give us a message of encouragement for our friends and for the women who are not here in class. God, that you would just let us use this incredible story of you leading your people just as encouragement of how present you are in our lives and how much you care about us. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So when we left last week, if you remember, we left last week with the people being kicked out of Egypt. And they were hurried out of Egypt really fast, given gold and silver. We talked about that the Egyptians were probably paying them off, paying their God off, hoping that they would say a good word for him. Even Pharaoh asks Moses to say a good word for him, to bless him when he does worship his God. And so we leave with the multitude. Let's just look at chapter 12 and pick up in verse 37. It says, the people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Conservative estimates are about 2 million people, because they would not have been counted men on foot. They wouldn't be on foot if they were particularly young or particularly old, or what women or children. So this is just your middle age, young age men. And so, and on top of all of that, there's also a mixed multitude also went up with them. And who's that mixed multitude? Egyptians, absolutely. Midianites, others that have been connected to Israel. And what God just explained, are they allowed to participate in the Feast of Unleavened Bread? Yes. If what, Anne? That's right, if they're circumcised, and then they become one of them and they're able to participate in the feast. That's correct. And so God has always welcomed the nations to his people. Sometimes we think that until Jesus came with the gospel that he was only for the Jews. That's never been the case. He was always interested in grafting in the nations to his people. And so we see this mixed multitude are with them, very much livestock, both flocks and herds. And of course, all they have is this unleavened cake of dough that they had brought out of Egypt. And there's an important little phrase right here that hopefully we'll talk about today. I didn't get to it last night, but the end of 39, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves, meaning that they're going to be on the road for a while. And if you're going on a big road trip, what do? Pack a cooler, right? You pack a cooler so that you don't have to buy everything along the way, or worry about where you're going to get stuff from. And in this case, they weren't able to pack provisions. So we're going to see they're going to run out of things pretty quickly in their journey. And that's not by accident either in how God's working things. And we see that Moses leaves with them, and he brings the bones of Joseph, if you remember. And verse 50, all the people of Israel did just as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. And on that very day, the Lord brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their hosts. And so we're going to go to Exodus 13. This is what we should have gotten done last week, and we didn't. But it's a super important chapter that God is going to tell them that his firstborn are to be set apart and consecrated. And it's going to be so interesting when you look at this, that God is literally obsessed with firstborn. Now, we know there's been some times where the birthright didn't go to the firstborn, it went to someone else. And we're going to see that again today, that God distinguishes who the firstborn is. And by the way, God tells us, that we are the children of God, but of course, who is firstborn? Jesus is firstborn. We're going to read about that today. All of this obsession about the firstborn is really picturing for us how important it is to God. And so let's look at the very first, Exodus 13. The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and of beast, is mine. Then Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out of Egypt out of a house of slavery, for by a strong hand the Lord brought you out of this place. And very uniquely, why do you think God is wanting them to consecrate the firstborn as a remembrance of them coming out of Egypt? Exactly, because that is how God accomplished the whole Passover, was through this distinguishing Israel from Egypt, distinguishing them, and they really distinguished themselves. How? By putting blood on the doorpost, correct? And so all of the way through this, we're going to see that this word redeem is really, really cool story. I have a girl in my class, a younger woman, and she's been praying about job decisions and everything. And yesterday she was praying about whether she was making the right decision to move. And one of her main reasons is she's so growing at West Side. She doesn't want to leave the church. And God gave her the word redeemed yesterday morning. And then last night, of course, it's going to be all the way through this scripture that we're going to be reading. And just remind me, as we talk about those salvation words, redeemed is one we hear a lot, right? But in particular, don't just tell me that redeemed means saved. That's not good enough for me. What does the word redeemed mean? That's exactly right. Bought, paid for, ransomed. It is the word they would have used when you were buying somebody off the slave market. You were ransoming them from the slave market. So yes, you are being saved as that's happening. But the big difference with the word redeemed is that it cost something. When you talk about someone just being saved, that may not cost anything. But if someone redeems you from water, and you're drowning, and they give their own life for you to be saved, that's very different than just throwing you a life preserver, isn't it? Literally, it costs something. And God wants us to remember that it costs something. And so, Mary, you're doing a bad job. You're not even waving your hand. She told me she is going to wave her hand at me so I'd be better at my slides. And there is no waving going on. Okay. So he says, so this firstborn idea is connected to this redeem word. So let's go on. He says, no leavened bread shall be eaten. Today in the month of Abib, you are going out. And when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall keep this service in this month. Meaning, he's really talking back to the leavened bread. That's the service he's talking about. In fact, he says, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days. No leavened bread shall be seen with you, or no leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory. You shall tell your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did to me, what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And it shall be to you as a sign on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. And it's so interesting there that God is already tying together the provision that he gave them and rescuing them out of Egypt to the law that he hasn't even given them yet. Y'all get that? He hasn't even given them the law yet, but he says Let this be a sign for you and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. It was to be a motivating factor for them. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this statute as at its appointed time from year to year, when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and shall give it to you. So here's the next thing they're to do. When they're in the land of the Canaanites, this is what they're to do. You're to set apart to the Lord all that first opens the womb. All the firstborn of your animals that are males shall be the Lord's. Every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. Or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. So basically, if you do not redeem it with a lamb, then the donkey must die. And so this idea that you are buying, basically, the firstborn with a lamb. And what have we seen God just do? We've just seen him redeem Israel with a lamb, the Passover lamb. Are y'all with me?
Sarah,
yes.
Could you explain about the donkey one more time? I'm
yes.
Sorry.
All he's saying here is that if you don't redeem that donkey with the lamb, then you should break the donkey's neck. Meaning,
so the donkey was the
firstborn. Yes,
okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
And he's not, so he's basically just saying that if the firstborn is as good as dead if you don't redeem it. That's kind of the, and then he even says, every firstborn of man among your sons shall be redeemed. You shall redeem. And so they were, when a firstborn son would be born, they would sacrifice a lamb to redeem that firstborn. And he says, and when in time to come, your son asks you, what does this mean? So this would be the older boys, right? Asking, why did you redeem the birth of this new baby boy? You shall say to him, by a strong hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. God redeemed us from Egypt, from the house of slavery. For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of animal. Therefore, I sacrificed to the Lord, and this is, by the way, this is the dad saying this to his son, right? He says, therefore, I sacrificed to the Lord all the males that first opened the womb, but all the firstborns of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a mark on your hand or frontlets between your eyes, for by the strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not, oh, hold on, I want to stop reading there. We're going to come back to this in just a minute. So let's look at this just a little bit more about the firstborn. If we go all the way back in Genesis to Abel and Cain and Abel, if you remember what Cain did is Cain, and I'll just read it really quick. It says, this is Genesis 4. It said, I have gotten, verse 2, and again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. and the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. We see that even here with Cain and Abel, we see this offering of the firstborn being what pleased God. And so we're going to see, if you turn back in Exodus, go to Exodus 4. You should be able to do that in your observation worksheets. God says something really interesting, and if you remember, we read this, and I told you we would come back to this idea and talk about it some more. But in Exodus 4, God is saying to Moses, look at verse 22, "Then you, Moses, shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my" what? "Firstborn son." What in the world does that mean? There's been lots of people who have lived, right? But God is choosing Israel to be his firstborn son. And he is going to redeem his firstborn son with the Passover lambs, correct? To bring them out of slavery. And then look, it says, "And I say to you, let my son go that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son." So from the very beginning, this was God's plan to emphasize the firstborn son. And so this is really going to factor in quite a bit. If you remember that, let's go back to Jacob and Leah. And you may be like, what? Why are we going back to Jacob and Leah? Because all of the tribes, right? All of these people that we're reading about that are being redeemed out of Egypt came out of Jacob's lineage, correct? All the tribes came out of Jacob's lineage. And I want us just to talk about for a minute Levi. And this is so interesting when, let me turn to it. Where is that? Genesis 49. This is where Jacob is dying, and he's giving his blessing upon the boys. If you remember this, we read this a lot back when we did Genesis, and we went through these different. Some of them are blessings, and honestly, some of them sound like they may be cursings, right? But he's basically speaking, prophesying what the future is going to look like. And I just want us to look at verse 5. And it says, "Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not in to their counsel. Oh, my glory be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men." And if you remember, what is this talking about? Yeah, that these are the two boys that went and killed all the men because of what had happened to Dinah. And it says, verse 7, "Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." Now here's what's interesting is in this, Jacob is basically saying about Levi that you're going to have no land of your own. You are going to be scattered among. And what's incredibly crazy is in spite of Levi's bad history and the curse that he got from his father, God's going to take the curse and make it a blessing. Let that just sink in for a minute. Who maybe had parents that you feel like they have more cursed you than blessed you as you've been growing up. That God can even take that. And God's going to do something with this tribe of Levi. Now, if you remember, who's from Levi? Moses, that's exactly right. Moses is from the Levi tribe. We saw that in Exodus 2. And of course, Aaron, because it's his brother, is also going to be part of that Levite tribe. And so let's look. This is super fun. Let's just go to Numbers for a minute. This was in your homework last week. And so all I'm doing is kind of laying a foundation for those verses that you looked up in Numbers. Bless you. And so let's look at just Numbers, because this whole idea of redeeming the firstborn son is going to go away in the book of Numbers. God's going to change it. And he is going to say, no longer do I need you to do that. I need you now. I'm going to turn it that the tribe of Levi is going to be my firstborn, among my firstborn, right? All of Israel is his firstborn. But let's look at Numbers 3 really fast. And this is where I got bogged down last night, so I'm going to try to go a little faster. I was reading that possibly God chose the tribe of Levi. Well, we know that God chose them from the foundation of the earth, right? Knowing that Moses and Aaron would both be part of this tribe of Levi. And so even if you look at verse 5, it says, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, bring the tribe of Levi near and set them before Aaron the priest, that they may minister to him. They shall keep guard over him and over the whole congregation before the tent of meeting, as they minister at the tabernacle. And when we get to the book of Numbers, we're going to see that this tribe is going to be very important in everything God's going to do. Look at verse 11. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, behold, I have taken the Levites from among the people of Israel instead of every firstborn who opens the womb among the people of Israel. And isn't it interesting when we look back at this, God was instituting two things. The Feast of the Unleavened Bread, which he tells them you're going to do continually. But then he says this firstborn, and it is interesting that the language doesn't say you're going to do this forever. The redeeming of the firstborn is as a reminder of what it costs to buy them out of Egypt. God bought them, redeemed them, ransomed them out of Egypt. And he says, now I don't need that firstborn, because Levi, the whole tribe, is going to take the place of that. And I love, he says, the Levites shall be mine. And if you remember, we just read, he said, the firstborn shall be mine. So what is he doing? He's consecrating, he's setting them apart. And then he says, for all the firstborn are mine. On the day that I struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated for my own all the firstborn in Israel, both of man and of beast. They shall all be mine. I am the Lord. So if you follow this, he is telling them to count all the boys. And then verse 40 of the same chapter, he says, and the Lord said to Moses, list all the firstborn males of the people of Israel from a month old and upward, taking the number of their names. And you shall take the Levites for me. I am the Lord. Instead of all the firstborn among the people of Israel, and the cattle of the Levites, instead of all the firstborn among the cattle of the people of Israel. So Moses listed all the firstborn as the Lord had commanded him. And then he has this number, right? And then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, now take the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the people of Israel, and the cattle of the Levites instead of their cattle. The Levites shall be mine. I am the Lord. And then this next phrase, and as the redemption price for the 273 firstborn of the people of Israel, you shall take, and he goes on telling them how they are to take this redemption money. And when we get there, we're going to see that he takes the Levite tribes, and what does he do? Does he give them land? No. What does he do? He spreads them out across the entire community, and he does that to bless the Israelites, right? Because there's a priest in every area, and also to serve them. And God literally took what Jacob said about Levi and turns it into a blessing for this tribe. And then one more verse out of Numbers 8. And I think you did these in your homework last week, not this week. Thus, this is 8:14. Thus you shall separate the Levites from among the people of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine. And you may be like, why are you focusing on this? Because what God is saying about the Levites is true about Israel and is true about us. That God has consecrated us. He's redeemed us. And we're going to read that in just a minute. Verse 15. And after the Levites shall go in to serve at the tent of meeting, when you have cleansed them and offered them as a wave offering, for they are wholly given to me from among the people of Israel. Instead of all the firstborn, I have taken that tribe for myself. And he says in verse 17, for all the firstborn among the people of Israel are mine, both of the man and the beast, on the day that I struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, and I consecrated them for myself. And I have taken the Levites instead of the firstborn among the people of Israel. So when we get to later on, you may be wondering why to this day the Jewish people do not consecrate. They don't offer a lamb for the firstborn of their boys. The reason why is that here in Numbers, God's going to replace that command with this Levite tribe. So what does that matter to us? Go to Hebrews.
Sarah,
Yes.
if they had 3 girls first,
Mm-hmm.
and only the first son that was born is still the firstborn, even though he doesn't open the womb?
Oh, good question.
And I was thinking that about the donkey. If the donkey's firstborn wasn't a male, then did that not go into effect that it had to be, or you have to wait and remember, the first male we have to redeem?
I have no idea. That's a great question. Will you raise your hand, ask David that when he gets to this passage?
Shall I stand up in the door and make her away from it? Yeah. Maybe I should just take him aside.
Yes, ask him. Yeah, because what was funny is I as I was getting ready this morning, I was like, hey, can you read ahead on this Exodus passage and see if you think I'm crazy about this? Because I didn't read any commentary support, and so yeah, it's funny. I'm doing that already because I'm like, I don't want you to preach it different than me when you get to it, because they'll think I'm a quack. All right, so let's go to Hebrews 1. This is just so amazing because listen.
Actually, we just thought he was taking your notes.
Yes, that's right. God is instituting all of this in great detail as a picture of bringing Jesus into the world, and that Jesus is going to fulfill this role of being the firstborn priest. And so let's read just Hebrews 1, and I hate to not start at verse 1. Let's just read it, won't take long. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things. And why is he heir of all things? We're going to read in a minute, because he's the firstborn. Through whom, so through Jesus, also he created the world. Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. And Jesus upholds the universe by the word of his power. And after making purifications for sins, Jesus sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high, having become much superior to angels, as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. And you may be saying, why is he talking about angels here? Because he's writing to Hebrew people who are consumed with angel worship right now. And so what the author of Hebrews is saying is, Jesus is so much better than the angels. He's of which of his sons, and in fact, that's what he's going to say, for to which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son, today I have begotten you? Now, this is one of the great mysteries of why has God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit, why have they chose, I don't even know if chose is the right word, why do they exist in the form of Father and Son? It is the way God manifests our understanding of the relationship he has with Jesus, is that Jesus is his son. Now we know in this language, we know that God didn't give birth to Jesus because Jesus was always there. But there is a point where God said to Jesus, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Now that's one of the great mysteries, is why did God choose to define his relationship with Jesus that way? Does that make sense? And I have no answers for you, but I can tell you this. It could be for us to understand the best way we can how precious we are as his children. Could be. But then look at the next. It says, or again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And those are all phrases back from the Old Testament that the writer is using. And look at verse 6. And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, meaning Jesus, when God the Father brought Jesus into the world, he said, let all God's angels worship him. And you may be like, well, that doesn't make sense. Jesus was born like when he was born. There were lots of other. In fact, we just looked at that Israel was his firstborn and the Levites were his firstborn. But Jesus in preeminence is the firstborn from all creation. He's the ultimate firstborn. And everything else after that is a picture of Jesus. Does that make sense? So him choosing Israel as his firstborn, him choosing these Levites as his firstborn. And what's so cool is that Jesus as the firstborn becomes the ultimate priest. Just like the Levites became the priest for the people, Jesus, the ultimate firstborn, is going to become the ultimate priest. That we don't even need the Levitical priests anymore. And so, so let's look at a couple more Hebrew passages. Let's go to Hebrew 7. Or let's go to 4 first, since it's chronologically, we come to 4 first. Look at what 4:14 says. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. So Jesus, as the firstborn Son of God, passed through the heavens and has become our great high priest. And because of that, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. And he says, therefore, we have confidence to draw near the throne of grace, and that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. And oh man, I wish we just had time to read the entire book of Hebrews. Look at verse 5 of chapter 5. He says, so also Christ, and basically 1 through 4 is basically just talking about how God picked those Levitical priests. That's basically what 1 through 4 is for, that he picked them. And verse 4 says, and no one takes this honor for himself, not only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not exalt himself to be made a high priest, but was appointed by God, who said to him, you are my son, today I have begotten you. And then he says in another place, you are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. Now, we can't go into all of that, but this is what's so cool, is that Jesus wouldn't even be born. If you remember, he wasn't a Levite, was he? He was from the tribe of Judah, right? Because he is a priest in the order of Melchizedek, who, we could do a whole lesson on this. You can just trust me on this, though. Melchizedek is one of these very unique, strange figures that happens in Genesis. And when I say figures, I'm not saying he's not real. He was very much real. Abraham gave a tithe to him, but he had no beginning and no end. And so for Jesus to be in the order of a priest, God created, I believe, Melchizedek to be a image that he couldn't even come in a Levitical priest, because he's so much better than the Levitical priests. One more, and then I promise we're going to end, is in chapter 7. By the way, if you're super interested in that whole story, you can read the whole chapter 7, because 1 through 10 is all about that Melchizedek. But look at verse 11. I love this. Now, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron? Meaning, why would we have ever needed a high priest like one that has no beginning and end, if Aaron in the Levitical priesthood was enough? And verse 12, for when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one had ever served at the altar. And I'm going to stop there. Here's what is beautiful about this whole idea, is that Jesus is the firstborn. God deems the Levitical priests as the firstborn that are then going to serve the people. And Jesus, as the firstborn priest, we just read it, is there in heaven serving us, isn't he? How does he minister to us? He intercedes for us to the Father, right? And this amazing idea that over and over and over again, God is going to use these, and that we become the children of God as we are redeemed with the Passover lamb, just like the Israelites. And instead of out of Egypt, out of slavery there, we are bought out of our former life, where we're slaves to what? Sin, the world, our own flesh, right? Jesus redeems us and makes us the children of God. Now, you may be like, well, no wonder we didn't get anything done. But I think this is going to be so important when we talk about over and over and over again, what do the people, and if you did your homework, you know this, what do the people constantly want to do? Go back, don't they? They want to go back. And I think that that is just the key to the problem with even us, is that sometimes we want to go back to who we were and what we had before Jesus. The life of what we think is easier. And so that's kind of my theme through this entire lesson, is that we have been redeemed as these Hebrews have. Don't want to go back. I'm telling you, do not want to go back to. So let's look at Exodus 14. And I promise we're going to move fast now. So let's look at this map just a second. Because he's going to move them. He's going to move the people. All right, so now I will tell you this. That a lot of these places, there is no archaeological evidence that many of these places, they don't know exactly where these places are. Some of them they do, like Ramses up there. There's lots of archaeological evidence there. So if you were to Google, where did the Israelites cross the Red Sea? You're going to hear about 20 different answers. There's lots of theories. And even among conservative theologians, there's a few different answers that could be. One that I believe that, and most conservative theologians would not go with this, is that really the Red Sea was a marsh, and it was just really not a lot of water, and so that's why it was super easy for them to cross. I think that's phooey, and we're going to see why, because we're going to see that there are walls of water as Moses depicts it, and I don't see how an Egyptian army is drowned in the marsh. There's a couple different theories. Some have them literally up in all the way up there, but this is the model we're going to go through, and this is the map you'll be looking at regularly. And I will tell you this, just if you're interested, there's even, in fact, if you look at the map she gives you, look at the map she gave you, you'll see that there's some 1s and 2s on there. Y'all see that? Yes, the map in the very back of the book. What page is that on? Yes, 239. Do you see how Migdal, there's a 1 and a 2? Do you see that? And how Baal Zephon, there's a 1 and a 2? Those are the possible choices of Migdal and Baal Zephon. So you know, if K is even giving it to you as choices, it means that either one of those could be really good choices, right? And then what's very interesting is look here down at Mount Sinai. Look, what do you see there? A number as well. And you may be like, what? We don't know where Mount Sinai is? No, we don't. We cannot define at this point exactly where Mount Sinai is. Mount Sinai could be there in that peninsula, or it could be over in what's modern day Saudi Arabia now. And so don't let that really bother you a lot, but I will tell you this. I didn't bring this up when we did it originally, but do you remember when Moses was out with the herd and God did the burning bush? So I had really studied this, even though I hadn't brought it up to you, that some believe that Mount Sinai was here for that very reason, because for him to even see the burning bush, he was with the Midianites, right? Why in the world was he all the way over here? If you remember, I said a good explanation to that would be that he had traveled with the animals over here for better pasture, to be close to that water. And so I'm okay with this idea that he traveled over here, he was maybe over here, saw that burning bush, and came close to Mount Sinai. So that's kind of how I will teach, because we got to pick a map, that Mount Sinai is here in that peninsula, but that's nothing we're going to part ways over. And that as we're looking at it, that right there is where they have crossed the Red Sea, and that Migdol is there. Now, one of the places they know for sure is this Etham. You see that? That's a pretty nailed down place. And so, looking at the map, here in a minute, God's going to drive them to Migdol. And so he could have driven them up to Migdol or down to Migdol. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what we're going to read here. So go back, Exodus 14, because it doesn't matter where it is. What matters is that here they were at that Etham, and they were in a pretty good place there to go ahead and travel out into the wilderness. But God does something where he purposely puts them between a rock and a hard place. He purposely takes his people and he puts them in a place of higher vulnerability than they would have been out there in the wide open. And chapter 13, let's just finish that. Verse 19, Moses is taking the bones of Joseph. And then verse 20, and they moved on from Succoth and camped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. So this just makes so much sense, right? They're right at the edge of the wilderness, ready to go in. And I love this. We're going to talk about this so much. The Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from the people of God. So at some point, when it went from light to darkness, God would change from being a cloud guiding them to a pillar of fire, one or the other. Y'all with me? And that is God himself with his people. And when we go all the way back to the Abrahamic covenant, how did God walk between the pieces? What is Abraham describe him as?
Fire pot.
Yeah, a fire pot, right? So this pillar of fire is something that we've seen continually representing God himself, and he's literally living with his people, dwelling with his people. Why does that matter at all? He hasn't been, right? In fact, since the garden, God has not dwelt with his people. And just like Adam and Eve, the people are going to continually say, I'd rather go back and be without you, God, than to keep journeying with you. That's what they're saying. Every time they want to go back, they're basically saying, being in your presence isn't enough. Oh, that's one of the ones that I forgot to read about the Levitical priesthood. It's so good because it says that the Levite tribe doesn't need land because God is their portion. I love that. And so we have the people, and I love this, that I think God does this to me personally all the time. When I think in my own mind that I've come up with a good way to do something or accomplish something, and then God says, oh no, let's go back and put you in a worse place. And he says, then the Lord said to Moses, tell the people of Israel to turn back. Now this makes no sense. And encamp in front of, I have no idea how to say it, so I'm just going to say Pi through the whole thing, between Migdol and the sea. In front of the Baal Zephon, you shall encamp facing it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they're wandering in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. So not only does he want them to be physically shut in, he wants it to look like to their enemy that they're shut in. Why? Because he wants the glory. And here's the thing, if so many times, if we can do something on our own, guess what? God doesn't get the glory. And if they were just going to march out into the wilderness just fine, God would not have gotten the glory there. So God has this idea that I am going to have the glory over these Egyptians. And so verse 4, and we've talked about this. In fact, we see both things happen in this text. He says, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all of his host. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. By the way, and they did so meaning the Israelites dropped down to where God told them to be. Verse 5, and when the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, was told that the people had fled, so this is going back in time now. This is back in time when he hears that the people have fled, and it really starts sinking into him, right? Because he told them, go. But as it sinks into him, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants changed toward the people. Why? Who's going to do all of our work? Right? We just lost all of our labor force. We've shipped them out of Egypt. Who's going to build our buildings for us? Verse 6, so he made ready his chariot and took his army with him and took 600 chosen chariots. So I want you to compare in your mind that we know there were 600 men, right? But now there are 600 chosen chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with the officers over all of them. So we have all of this army coming after them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. And really that's better translated confidently. They were going out with great confidence and defiant that Pharaoh may not let them go. They're going. And the Egyptians pursued them all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and his horsemen and his army overtook them and camped at the sea by Pi in front of that Baal Zephon. When Pharaoh drew near, right? What did they do? They lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they what? They feared greatly. We just saw that they were confident to the point of being defiant just a few verses ago. But all of a sudden, what have they done? They've looked at their enemy and they've become fearful. And the people, which that's okay. I mean, fear isn't always a bad thing, but what comes next is the problem for them. And man, you could preach a whole sermon on this about lifting up your eyes to look at the enemy. What should they be looking at? The cloud or the pillar, right? But what they've done is they've looked back, and they've lifted up their eyes and looked back. And they see these Egyptians, they fear greatly, and the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. So they're crying out to the Lord, and then it's so interesting that very often it's not enough to cry out to the Lord. You then have to complain to a person, right? And you know, I was thinking about this, that so often you could really put the church in the role of Moses. That very often people get in these bad positions, and we're going to see this over and over again, and I'm going to say this over and over again. They get in these bad positions, whether it's the enemy about to get them, whether they're thirsty, whether they're hungry, whether they're sick of their provisions, whatever it is. And really picture every time kind of the church being like Moses, the one that really absorbs the grumbling. And they grumble against really church. And they say, is it because there's no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out to Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone, Moses, that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would be better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Now, y'all, they literally have God with them, leading them, watching over them, and somehow they'd rather go back and serve the Egyptians than to live with God. By the way, people make that choice all the time.
The Lord kept saying that my people go so they can serve me, and here they are saying, no, I don't want to serve you, I want to serve the Egyptians.
That's exactly right. Because here's the thing. You serve something. A lot of people think, because I remember hearing that message very early on, that I was a slave to sin. And I remember thinking, I'm not a slave to anything. I'm a very independent woman, right? I'm not a slave to anything. That is one of the messages of the gospel. You are a slave to something. You're either a slave to sin or a slave to God. It's one or the other. And you're so right. They'd rather go back and be a slave to the Egyptians than to serve God. And so I love Moses, and man, this is our message. We should all put this on our mirrors at home. Fear not, stand firm, and see. See, it's not even fear not, stand firm, and fight. Because we don't have to fight. It's just stand firm, fear not, and watch what God's going to do for you. So when you're in a rock, if you're between a rock and a hard place, number one, don't think God doesn't want you there. Because there may be more glory rescuing you from that place than if you could have accomplished it yourself. Number two, when you're there, fear not, stand firm, and watch what God can do for you. And I love how Moses' confidence, which he might work today, which he may figure out, it says, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. This is, talk about Moses. Like, this is the guy who was like, I can't talk to my people. You know, I can't talk to Pharaoh, right? Like, he's so confident right now. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to be silent. And the Lord said to Moses, now this is funny to me, right? This is did y'all get this, how random this is? Moses does this huge statement of great faith, and then what does God say to him? Why do you cry to me, Moses? So it does tell us that even in his strength, Moses is like, okay, God, are you going to do this? Like, I told the people you're going to do this. Are you really going to do it? And he said, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. And I think this is so cool because God doesn't need Moses and he doesn't need Moses' staff, yet he chooses to use Moses at this minute, right? Like, did God need Moses to part the Red Sea? No. He could have just done it, but look what he does. He includes Moses in the miracle. He says, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all of his hosts, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know what? That I am the Lord, when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God, who was going before the host of Israel, moved and went behind him. Now, is that not just incredible that the angel of the Lord goes from traveling in front of them to a place of protection, from guiding to now protecting? And I just can't help but think, Stephen has gotten me hooked on these, YouTube videos, you can look up these amazing animal videos. And so we were just watching like the 10 most amazing animal videos that there are. And I've actually seen one of these in person, not that particular footage, but oh no, you're fine. I saw a mama lion protect 3 baby cubs from a pack of hyenas. And it was so, it was something else, y'all. We sat there and probably watched for about an hour and a half. This ongoing saga between this mother lion trying to protect these 3 babies from the pack of hyenas. And initially the babies had traveled, they were old enough to be a little further away from her. So literally like on the thing, she was with one and there were 2 over here when the hyenas came. It's one of those amazing things to witness in person, and how she was trying to keep this cub with her. She picked that cub up in her mouth, and the whole time the little babies are doing their little baby lion cry. It's so cute. Oh my gosh. But I'm telling you, is that not, those of us who've been moms in the room, Is that not how you feel about your child, right? You'll go from guiding them to literally putting your own body in the way of protecting them. And we see God doing that. Is that not amazing? From guiding to protecting, he goes and hems them in, basically. Y'all, God wants to do that for us.
So what does that word host mean, like in verse 20 here, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel?
Group of Israel, the group of the Egyptians, the group of Pharaoh's people. It's just a way of representing a group of them. Like, yeah. And this is what I asked David about, by the way. You wanted to know. Because this is what's so weird about what happens is that the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind him, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And this is the weird part. And there was the cloud and the darkness. And so we understand that clouds make us not be able to see well, right? Like when fog comes in, what can you not do? See. It's like pea soup, right? Like you're going through the fog. So this is what it is, but then crazy, it's also light at the same time. And it says, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. You have this idea, in fact, verse 24, this is so cool. We'll go back and read those few verses, but in the morning, watch the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud. So here's what's interesting, just in my very humble opinion, is that it's either been a cloud or the fire. But in this particular situation, it's a cloud and a fire. Lots of reasons this, they say that it could be darkness to the Egyptians and light to the Israelites, because if you look at what's happening, they're literally crossing the Red Sea. They need to see. And yet it is clouds. And so if you really want to know what I asked David, I was like, is this possible that it's maybe God and Jesus in the two representations of the cloud and fire? And he said he didn't think so. That's the end of that.
I'm with you. I think it's God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And because he represented
Oh, yeah.
himself on Mount Sinai.
100% that God, what I was trying to do was have God and Jesus both there. Because in a bit, Moses is going to talk about the right hand of God, which we know Jesus is at the right hand of God. So I was connecting his song, which we're going to read in a minute, back to this. But there's no proof of that. But I think it's so interesting that God literally is giving them everything they need. And in this cloud, in fact, he's going to gunk up their wheels. So what is he doing? He's allowing them to make it through. And he's slowing the Egyptians down. And it says, verse 21, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. There is no marsh room here. It is a wall of water. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them in the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. So they're like in the waterbed themselves, right? And it's almost like And man, I love this phrase right here. And in the morning watch. It's like God is watching over them. And in the morning watch, he notices that they need a little more time. And so he looks down, God looks down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily, which makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, if you pull all the water out, you're gonna have mud at the bottom, right? And the Egyptians said, let us flee before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Then the Lord said,
Yes.
yeah,
It's
say
hard
it
to
again.
believe the Egyptians just came to this conclusion now.
In the middle of destruction.
Yeah.
Yes, and what's interesting though is it doesn't say really that Pharaoh. It does say that the Egyptians, like, you know, yeah, absolutely. And again, the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the hosts of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being walled up to them on their right hand and their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore, which that makes so much sense, right? If the water closed up, literally they're floating up to the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Now, why does God take us from a place where we can do it all on our own and put us in a place where we need him to show up so that we fear him, that we understand he has great power, and we worship and trust him more? And it's a representation to whoever's following us, right? Who's ever chasing us. I do want to just make it through Exodus 15. You may be really worried. We're just going to make it through just the song, okay? Because this is super cool. This is exactly what God wants us to do on the other side of the victory. He says, then Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to the Lord. So they're basically worshiping God here. And he says, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. And that may bother you because you're like, I thought Jesus was Prince of Peace. Yes, but when God wants to protect his children, he will stand between you and your enemies. And I don't know about you. That gives me great comfort. Mary? Oh, thank you. Slide. One of my problems is that my eyesight now is so bad I cannot see that TV back there. So, I don't know. It's supposed to be a confidence monitor. That's what they're called. And I have no confidence in it because I cannot see back there anymore. Chariots Pharaoh's chariots and his host cast into the sea, and his chosen officers were sunk in the Red Sea. The floods covered them, and they went down into the depths like a stone. Here's that verse that I was thinking of going back. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrow your adversaries. You send out your fury. It consumes them like stubble. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. It's interesting, that east wind that we just read about, Moses describes. It's the blast of God's nostrils. The flood stood up in a heap. The deeps congealed in the heart of the sea. Isn't that interesting? Those of us who make congealed salads, right? Moses is saying the deeps congealed. Think about that, for the water to like stand up the way it did. Isn't that such an interesting word, right? Like you beat cream, like you know the sign that it's good whipped cream, right? Is you put a spoon in it and it stands up because you've congealed it enough that it stands up. There's a little cooking tip for you. All free. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I'll divide the spoil, my desire shall have its fill of them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. But you blew your wind, the sea covered them, and they sank like lead in the mighty waters. And this is what God wants us to ask constantly. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? And as we looked at every one of those plagues, we saw, if you remember me saying, why don't we just go to the end of the story, right? Why are we going to take all this time with lice and frogs and locusts and why? Because he wanted to show that among the gods there is no one like our God. Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders. You stretch out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. And then look at verse 13. And this is true for us as well. You have led them in your steadfast love, the people whom you have redeemed. The people you have brought out of Egypt, you have led them in your steadfast love. You have guided them by your strength to your holy abode. The peoples have heard and they've trembled. Pangs have seized the inhabitants, and he's going to talk in these verses that the land that they're going to is going to hear about what God has already done. Verse 16, terror and dread fall upon them because of the greatness of your arm. They are still as stone. Till your people, O Lord, pass by. Till the people pass by whom you have what? Purchased. Same, redeemed, purchased. You will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, which you have made your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. The Lord will reign forever and ever. I'm going to skip verse 19. It's really a summary of what we just saw happen. But then verse 20 is super cool because we get the name of Moses' sister for the first time. Then Miriam, and what does Moses call her? A prophetess, right? First time we're going to see a woman named in any kind of role of individually hearing from God, that she's going to have this title. And by the way, that's the definition of a prophet, is one who hears from God. And we can see that she has some leadership here, doesn't she? Because she's the sister of Aaron and Moses, and she leads all the other women taking a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went after her with tambourines and dancing. And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown in the sea." And we're going to stop there, and I'm going to catch up next week, I promise. Because we're going to see a pattern here. We go from Moses and the people singing, the women dancing, and then in a very short period of time, 2 verses really for us, the people are going to grumble. And here's the thing, even when you're reading this, just make sure you're paying attention to this, that here they are walking in the wilderness, 3 days they found no water. But then right around the corner, verse 27, they get to Elim, and there's what? 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. You may be like, what's important about the palm trees? Well, they show there's water. When you're traveling in Israel, you'll see this to be true. It'll be desert. It's really good desserts too, but desert, and then all of a sudden you'll see a patch of green. You know what a patch of green means? Water. Water's there. Oasis. And so here's the thing. God keeps them in the wilderness and in the desert when the water's right there. He's in control of the water, right? But he wants them to be thirsty. Why? Because he wants to test their faith. In fact, he says this is a test. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them. And when we think of testing, we don't like that word, do we? But it is, he's proofing us. He is seeing what we're made of. Not for him, by the way, right? Because here's the thing. He already knows they're going to complain. He's testing them for what? For them, right? He's testing them for them to see how unfaithful they are, and so that they can correct their ways. And man, we're going to see they are a hard-headed group of people. And God is going to be, his steadfast love for the people that he redeems will not end. That he is just going to love them and be faithful to them for generations. And God does the same for us. In spite of our grumbling, in spite of our fear, in spite of our having our eyes on the enemy instead of on God, in spite of us choosing other things instead of his presence, God stays with us, loves us with a steadfast love, because we are the people he's redeemed. And just let that truth soak into you. And you know, we all struggle. Some of us just are in the wilderness and we want the water. We have a precious lady in our Bible study who's looking at a cancer diagnosis. That's hard, not to be looking at the enemy, isn't it? Looking at the enemy coming upon you and being fearful of it. Or whether it's you're bored and tired, like they get with the bread, right? What are we going to do? Eat bread all the time, right? And so, you know, I love that. I love our mission statement for that reason, because we're all on a journey and we're all at different places in the journey. And so at some point you will identify with Israel, whether it's having your eyes on the enemies and fear, or whether it's not trusting God for the water and the bread. And we are on that same journey, just like the Israelites are, to our promised land, heaven. I mean, it's just such a beautiful picture. of where we are. And so I just hope that this is so encouraging to you to watch God's faithfulness with his people and how he's crazy about those he redeems. He's crazy about them. And he's got your back. So trust him if he puts you in a place where you need him to show up. Thank God that you get to bring him more glory that way than if you just can do it on your own. So let's pray. God, the truth we see in the way that you deal with your people is just overwhelming. For those who think of you as just some cosmic force that is removed from your creation, God, we see the very opposite of that. That we see you literally on a morning watch over your people. And that attention, God, I can just think of being a new mom and having a baby, and that we watch over that baby, and we have a morning watch and an evening watch, and God, just the attention that we give our own children. And God, like Hebrews says, if we, being sinful human beings, can love our children the way we do, how much more you as our Heavenly Father love your children. And so God, we thank you for your firstborn son who became our Passover lamb, who redeemed us from our bondage, from our Egypt. And God, may we never want to go back. May we always want to stay with your presence. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.